Alright guys, so I don't make videos very often or ever. This is really kind of my first one. But I work on stuff quite often, and a lot of times I have to figure out how to do it because there's no videos, or I don't have the money to buy the Chilton book or something like that. And don't get me wrong, I know what I'm doing. I've been doing it for a while, but there's some things that I'd like to point out. So this is a 2002 Dodge Durango. And what happened was all the seals on this front diff had dried out and all the fluid was leaking out all over the place. And right now I have it all apart and cleaned up and everything, but it needed rebuilt because it was making some whining sounds, so all the bearings were bad. And, checked out the gears and everything while we're in here, and, they all look good and everything like that. So a couple things I wanted to point out, because this is a Chrysler axle. There's not a lot of videos online about things like that. And when you go in to buy the axle bearings, there is a bearing on the left side here, and they'll tell you that in the book, but when they look it up, and I called multiple places and everything, and nobody knew what was in this right side, and it's because it's not really a bearing. It's kind of like a crank bearing, as in it's just it doesn't have any rollers in it. So not necessarily a crank bearing, but that type of bearing. So I still don't know where to find that, but I'm just not fully rebuilding this, so I'm just going to leave it in. So that's one thing to keep an eye on. And then also, with all of the other Chrysler axles, there is a adjuster right here and right here to adjust the backlash and whatnot on your diff. Well, this doesn't have that. It has spacers, and since I didn't change the gears, I'm going to keep those spacers. But I'm sure they make shims and things like that to go in there, so that's just something to keep in mind if you're going to pull one of these apart. And also, I already put it back together, but I'm sure you already know, on the back of this, there's two bearings on the back of your pinion. There's two bearings. There's an outer bearing and an inner bearing in here. I just did the outer bearing because I told them when I ordered all the parts that I needed an outer bearing and inner bearing and axle bearings and axle seals and whatnot. And I didn't check because I trusted them. And I only had the outer bearing. So just make sure you get all the right stuff. There's also a crush sleeve in there that you need to make sure that you get the proper torque on that bolt and all that good stuff, because there's not actually a torque spec on how tight it needs to be there. I mean, there is in a sense, but that's a whole nother thing. So and a lot of the Chrysler axles have either a dowel pin or a screw right here. This one had the dowel pin, and I was really hoping for the screw because it's a lot nicer to get out of there. But there's a hole on this side that you can get that through, and obviously you have to do it while it's together. And you need, what I had to do was I had to grind one down to make it work. And I don't remember what size it was, but what I did was I ground down a dowel pin punch, made it nice and long, but this is the shortest it can possibly be to get that dowel pin out of there, so you need something about that long. And let me see if I can find a tape measure for you. It's kind of a pain in the ass, but every project has crap you gotta deal with. So I'm trying to do this one-handed here. Sorry, if I end up doing a lot more videos, I'll buy a camera and stand and whatnot. So about 4 inches is what you want. And again, let me see if I can find the size on here. I might accidentally ground it off. Yeah, I don't see it on there. But I went to O'Reilly's and bought a pack of them, and it was, here, I can give you a range of what size it could be. Let's see, the one size that was too small was 3/16, and too big was 1/4. So it might have been 5/16. No, that would be 1/4. I don't remember what it was, but yeah. So that's what you need, between 3/16 and 1/4. And I also had to grind this side flat because it has to be right up against the case here. It's a pretty tight fit, and I'll start the video again when I put the dowel pin back in just to demonstrate, if you want. I mean, you can't tell me, but I'm going to do it anyways. And then also, you know, rule of thumb, whenever you're taking the diff apart, these spider gears have shims and everything back behind them, and you want to make sure that those shims don't fall out. It's not impossible to put them back in there, but you know, it's a pain. So because you have to pull this dowel pin out, and then the axle shafts have little C-clips on them, and I have the C-clips out of them right here, but they look like this. And I dropped the diff here. Hold on. And you have to get those C-clips out, but in order to do that, you have to push the axles in, and obviously this pin gets in the way. So you pull the pin out, you push the axles in, you pull the C-clips off, and then you push them out, but don't push them out all the way until you get this back in, or else all your spider gears will fall out. Spider gears will fall out. And I've already put the new bearings on this diff. I already put the new bearing in there. And I know it's wrong to put it together without doing brand new bearings all the way around, only doing a few bearings. I know. I don't really want to hear about it. I don't really care. So do all the bearings if you're going to do it, but I didn't, and I don't really have a lot of time. I have to have this done by tomorrow, so I'm just not going to worry about it. So I will be... Okay, so I told you I'd show you that dowel pin. So I have it halfway in there, and I've already got the... Well, it's kind of hard to show you because I have it turned, but there we go. I have those C-clips back in, the axles back in, or the axle shafts back in, excuse me. You want to get this as straight up and down as possible, and you'll see once you get the dowel pin in there. So that little hole is right there. So you're going to slip it right in there and just spin it until that shaft is centered. That way it's as high as possible. So that's how you'd get it out, is you'd pound that in there. And you have to go this direction out. You can't pound the dowel pin the other way. It'd be a lot harder, but just don't. Just only go that way. So I already have it started back in, so obviously I don't need to pound it out. And then you have to go in, obviously, with the dowel pin on this side. And those C-clips, I didn't really describe before. There's a couple of different ways to get them off. You can take a pair of C-clamp pliers like this, or clamp pliers like this, or spreader pliers, or whatever the hell you want to call them. I forget what they're actually called. I had to grind mine down a little bit, but it was like $3 for that set, and they're kind of a piece of crap, so I didn't really care. But you can spread them and pull them off, or you can work them off with a screwdriver. Be careful. They're kind of like a piston ring if you've ever done one of those. Just if you spread it too far, it's going to break. So same rule applies when you're putting it on. If you've ever put on a piston ring without a special tool, put them on like that. And they are a little bit difficult down inside of here, because I would recommend probably doing this left one first. I did this right one first, and it was kind of a pain in the ass because this shaft's longer. It's kind of harder to deal with. So you do what you want, but that's kind of just a little tidbit from me. Alright, I'm done for now. Alright, so what I've gotten done since the last one was I put the diff back in there, or the axle, or the carrier, or whatever you want to call it. It's the, I don't remember if I said or not, but it's the Chrysler 8-inch assembly, diff, whatever you want to call it. And I don't know if I said that earlier, but crawl underneath here and I'll show you a couple things. So getting this back up in here, obviously I'm doing it by myself. So what I did was, I don't know if you can see, but there's 2 bolts right here. Those hold it in. Then there's 2 more on top. I don't know if you can see my hand, but there's 2 more. My hand's on the end of them. Then there's also 2 more right on the other side of this bracket. So right in, yeah, you're not going to be able to see that, but oh, maybe you can. The head of one's right there, I think. So there's 2 there, 2 up there, and then 2 over here. So there's 6 bolts that hold this thing up here. And what I did was I stood it up and I got one of these bolts in just to line it up. And then I put a jack under the pumpkin right here. And I jacked it up and I put one of those in, and then I put the jack back here, lifted this up and put one of those in, and then I went around and put them all in. Don't tighten them down because the 2 on the back here are oval slotted, so they're adjustable kind of, but it makes it difficult to put those in and the other ones in if you tighten them down, obviously. So that's that. And then also, I'm sure a lot of you know, but for those that don't, the CV axle, when it goes back on here, these just pop right on and off. I know it has the C-clip like it does inside the axle there, or inside the carrier there, but they just pop on and off, and I didn't specify that earlier. So for those of you that didn't know, now you know. And then also, there's 4 bolts on this side for the drive shaft, and then there's 6 bolts on that side to pull it off, and it's got little clips. I'll show you in my pile of bolts over here. Are these right here. So these are the clips, and then these are the bolts, and there's 6 of them, and they're 8mm bolts. And then up here, I didn't specify the size on these either. The 2 up top of this are 18s, and then the other 4 are 15s, but the nut is an 18. So the bolt itself is a 15mm head, and then the nut on the back is an 18. And then what else? Can't think of anything else at the moment. Obviously, when you're doing this, you want to look for other stuff that needs replaced. I know there's other stuff on here that needs replaced, but since it's my own personal vehicle, I really am not going to care at the moment. But like, see all this rust in the hub assembly here? I don't know if you can see it very well, but it's not super bad, but it is rusting, so that's going to need replaced in the future. My CV axles weren't too bad. They're not slinging grease or anything like that. I can't feel a whole lot of play in them. Both of the joints on my shaft have a little bit of play. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's not supposed to have that much play in it. But I'm gonna put it back in for now, anyways, because, like I said, I really don't care. Oh yeah, so what I did to pull this off was I pulled the outer tie rod off, and then I disconnected the upper ball joint and flopped it down, and then you can pull the CV axle out of there. You undo this bolt right here that holds the brake line in place so that you don't put too much tension on that, so now it just moves around. I guess one could have taken out the bolt for the lower ball joint and then popped out the inner tie rod, or outer tie rod, sorry. But I didn't want to do it that way. On this side, I did it differently than the other side because I wasn't paying attention. But these are bolt-in ball joints on the top, so you can undo the 3 bolts and then pop it off that way. Or you can do the harder way, which I did on this side, which is take the nut off the bottom, and there's a little pin in there that a lot of times is rusted in there like that one is, so I'm going to have to drill that out or get it out, or I'll just Loctite the nut on, I guess, which you're not supposed to do. But and then you can beat it. Anyways, you can separate this and then pop it off that way. But it's a lot more difficult that way. I'm not sure how much more difficult it's going to be to get in. Usually I have more success putting them in this way. But with the 3 bolts on top, I don't know. Usually when I'm dealing with these, I'm dealing with press-in stuff because for some reason the crappiest stuff always needs worked on. So there's that. And then also I noticed, I mean, this probably doesn't apply to you, but I did brakes on this not too long ago, calipers and pads and rotors. And I've been hearing a squeaking noise, and I thought it was from the rear, but it's from my calipers rubbing up against my rotor here. It's the that little spring, so I'm gonna have to figure out why it's doing that. It's not doing it on the other side, so it's possible it just needs ground down or something like that, or I don't know. My slide pins are all good and everything, so I'm not sure. They're the same caliper. I didn't mix them up or anything when I put them on there. So what else? I can't think of anything else at the moment. Oh, when you're putting that back together, the specification for the backlash on those is I believe it's like 0.6 to 0.10, 0.06 or 6 thousandths or 10 thousandths. I obviously would adjust to 6 because it's better, but you want to check that with a dial gauge while you have it out and everything like that. Make sure it doesn't have excessive play in the ring gear, and if it does, then you'll need to get different shims. Mine was fine. Mine was at about 7 or 8, so I'm not going to worry about it. Like I said, I'm not doing this the 100% perfect way and replacing everything possible while I'm doing it. I'm just kind of... This was the amount of time that I had to do that front diff, which I really needed to do, and the rest of it can all be done without dropping the whole axle, so I'll do that stuff later. There's a skid plate right here. Bolts in right there. And then it bolts in to that back one as well. It bolts, it goes over it, like on top, like, it's hard to describe. It overlaps it, and then you put the bolts in through it. I'll show you when I'm done. Some of them have a cross member here. I was watching a video the other day, and he had to pull a cross member out to drop this axle out of here, and I do not have a cross member in the way. I didn't have to pull any cross members. So I'm not sure if it was on an 03, so maybe they introduced it in 03 or it was a special version or something like that, but I didn't have that, so I didn't have to worry about it. There's also the plastic, there's a plastic skid plate that goes right here. They are right here. And this one just pops off. It's got a bunch of those plastic rivets that hold it in, and then this is the one that goes underneath there. I'm going to get back to it, and I might make another video when I'm done showing you everything else. Okay. Alright, so last video, I got everything put back together except for the tires on and the car dropped. So I just ground that little pin down a little bit where it was rubbing. You got to be careful when you're grinding that because obviously it's a rivet. If you grind it too low, this thing's just going to pop right off of there. And then it's not doing anything. So that's what I did. Now I got a decent amount of room there. Kind of the same amount as on the other side. As far as putting the ball joints in go, I'd just do new ball joints when you do this project because it's kind of a pain. Not to mention mine are pretty shot anyways, but I think I had an easier time on this side when I didn't undo these bolts than I did on the other side, just because over here you have one thing to line up and over there I had to do all three. And I just put one bolt in at a time, but it was still kind of a pain. I mean, they're both pretty difficult, but you know, it is what it is. Do it the way you choose to do it. Oh, the CV axles. So I've seen it. So I do this kind of all day, every day at where I work, but obviously I can't make videos where I work. So I've seen it come in where CV axles, somebody did their own CV axles, and these aren't in all the way. So these snap into place, and these are in all the way. I didn't clean this one off as good as the other side, but this is in all the way. I don't know if you can see that very well, but if you can see any splines or anything at the end of this, it's not in all the way. It'll pop into place, and what happens if you don't pop it into place, it's going to wear out the end of that axle shaft. And then you got to do this whole project again. I mean, you don't have to pull the whole diff and everything if you don't want to, but then you have to do this whole project again to replace that axle shaft. Obviously, that's kind of a pain. So, make sure you get your CV axles in all the way. Use Loctite where it's necessary. I still haven't torqued these CV axle nuts yet because I'm going to do that when it's on the ground. I'm not sure if you're supposed to do it that way or not, but that's the way I always do it. I know I've heard it both ways, where if you put the vehicle's weight on it, it's not good, or blah, 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 blah. I really just don't care. So, put the outer tie rods back on. I put that bolt for the brake line back in. I put the drive shaft back in. What I did to do that was I had it in two-wheel drive when I was getting all the bolts started. I had the transfer case in two-wheel drive. That way I could spin it around. I don't know. I don't remember whether I left it or not. It's in two-wheel drive right now. So when it's in two-wheel drive, you can spin it. So you get all the bolts started that way, and then I locked it into four-wheel drive when I wanted to tighten them down, and I did it that way. And then put the skid plates back on. So this is what I was talking about earlier when I said this one, the one that I took off, goes on the bottom. So these two bolts right here are where it's held in, obviously. So this plate goes on the bottom of the other one, and then it bolts in the two spots up here. And then this is the plastic one that goes in. Mine's broken right there. And then I'm also missing the little cover for the oil filter access. What else? I think that's about it. And yeah, so I'll bolt the tires back on, put it back together. I put the fluid in the diff. When you're putting the fluid in the diff, obviously you put it in until it starts coming out that hole, or until you can just reach down and it's at your finger level at the hole. It's supposed to be level with the hole. And right now I have the car on kind of an incline, so I probably filled it a little more than I needed to. But, oh well. It's my personal rig, so I don't really, not paying as close to detail as I would on probably a customer's vehicle. So there you have it. That is a 2002 Durango 8-inch diff, and yeah, it'll also work for the Dakota. So have fun.